Welcome everybody. Welcome to the Construct Innovate webinar series on modern methods of construction. This is week 2 of an 8-week series around modern methods of construction. My name is Jamie Goggins, and I'm I'm Director of Construct Innovate, which is Ireland's National Research Centre for Construction Technology and Innovation. I'm hosting the webinar today. I'm delighted to have 3 fantastic speakers again today. So as I said, this is week 2 of an 8-week series. Last week we had an introduction to modern methods of construction. Today the focus is design and delivery of homes at scales, and is modern methods of construction the magic bullet. Our 3 speakers, we have Lord Moylan, who's chairman of the Built Environment Select Committee in the House of Lords in the UK, and he's going to talk about the UK government and modular construction. We have Aaron Curley, who's director of ICI Advisory, and he's going to talk about scaling MMC to support housing delivery. We're absolutely delighted. Speakers have taken given us some of their valuable time to be able to speak today. Without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first presenter, which is Lord Moylan, who's going to talk from the UK government's perspective and modular construction. So over to you, Lord Moylan.
Thank you very much. I'm just making sure I'm on. Yes, I am. Thank you very much. As Jamie said, I chair the Built Environment Select Committee at the House of Lords. I won't be doing that for more than another week, but my term is coming to an end. But back in the second half of April of 2023, we did a short inquiry into MMC, particularly in relation to housing. We didn't look at its application in non-housing type buildings, but particularly in housing, because we were intrigued by the question, what has happened to it? 10 years ago, modular construction, particularly volumetric construction, was the future, and all sorts of so-called factories were set up across England for people to, create these wonderful volumetric homes. And then in the course of 2022, 2023, they all either started withdrawing from the market or just went bust. And so we were trying to find out a little bit about why this had happened. We're not entirely sure that we did get any real answers to it, but we ended up with a lot of questions, not least for the government, which is in a way our job, because part of our job is holding the government to account. In the industry, the evidence we took, we work on the basis of taking evidence from witnesses and written evidence that is sent to us. In the industry, the evidence we took from those who had sort of exited was that the main problem was that they had an unsatisfactory and irregular pipeline of work, which was an argument that I was mildly unsympathetic to, because the whole, you can say that about any factory. And all factories depend on a reasonably regular throughput of raw materials into finished products. And if demand is terribly lumpy, part of their job is to go out and try and smooth it. That's what sales, marketing, and so forth does. Why would you look to the government to sort that out? But in fact, they were looking at the government at every stage, because the government's involvement was to get housing associations to be the customers, not the private sector particularly, but housing associations, which in Britain are charitable bodies, but effectively state-funded, that construct and maintain housing for sale on a subsidized or low-rent type basis. The housing associations, when we spoke to them, they had targets set for them, but the targets were very woolly. When we spoke to them, we got into an argument about cost and price. In principle, factory construction using semi-skilled as opposed to fully skilled labor in an automated process, rather than standing in a wet field waiting for the rain to stop so you can go in and, skilled trades can take it in turns to do different jobs. There ought to be ought to have a cheaper price tag on it when it comes out at the other end. The complaint from the housing associations, one of them was that the modular modular constructed housing was too expensive. And the difficulty there, of course, is that we never established fully who was talking about cost and who was talking about price. But that disconnect was really quite important. Another area that caused difficulty was claims that these buildings were either difficult to insure or difficult to get a mortgage on. Because of the non-standard construction, in particular the insurance, the concerns about fire, and gaps between modules that might create fire opportunities for the spread of fire, and so forth. Again, we didn't get to the bottom of this because when we had the industry representatives, the insurance companies, the banks, and so forth come and talk to us, they claimed. We didn't believe them, actually, but they claimed that everything was normal, there were no problems. They were perfectly willing to insure these buildings and lend on them, but actually that simply wasn't sustainable. We didn't find that that was what the evidence supported. And then finally, I just have a very quick word about the government. The government was all in favor of this to the extent that it was a very, very small issue for them. So they threw a few £1 million at it to set up a working party. We found the working party never actually met. They gave a mandate to the Homes and Communities Agency. It's now called Homes England, which is the funding body they use for the delivery of homes at arm's length. They gave them a mandate to increase the amount of modular construction. When we spoke to Homes England, they said they had a strategy which was summarized in the 5 S's. And then the 5 S's consisted of 5 words, I can't remember, beginning with S. So we said, well, that's not a strategy, that's a sort of strap line. Could we see the document that underlines it? And it suddenly proved rather difficult for them to produce the document. They said their strategy was distributed across a number of documents, none of which they could really produce. So for Homes England, the whole thing turned out to be, again, a minor and unimportant issue from their point of view in practice, to which they devoted very little resource and very little thought. So the whole thing, at least as far as the volumetric end is concerned, we found was a mess from start to finish. And in a way, it's not surprising that it has, from a housing point of view, really sort of collapsed in the UK. And with that, I'll draw my remarks to a close.
Very good. So really interesting. I mean, similar discussions happening in Ireland around price versus cost. Why modular might be more expensive currently than traditional build. The concern about insuring homes and getting a mortgage in there. And we had a presentation last week around certification and the importance of that to kind of that it's all certified and covered in that way. And then I suppose that mandate by the government, in particular through our housing agencies in there, and to fund delivery, but also to earmark, to flag to the market that there is a pipeline of work here by a large number of houses that will be delivered through MMC, and that's something that our government have been trying to do here in Ireland as well. So we're going to move on to our second speaker. Our second speaker is Aaron Curley, who's director of ICI Advisory, and he's going to talk from his perspective around scaling MMC to support housing delivery. So over to you, Aaron.
My name is Aaron Curley. I'm working as a management consultant in the industrialised construction space, so MMC space. Jamie mentioned my own company is ICI Advisory, and I'm also working with the team at Cast in the UK and also Clark Consultancy. So as mentioned, I'm going to talk to you about scaling MMC to support housing delivery. What I'll quickly do is touch on some of the challenges as a recap, why MMC is important to help solve these challenges, and some of the approaches to scaling MMC adoption to support housing delivery based on predominantly lessons learned from the UK, and probably building on some of the comments made by Lord Moylan. So again, just looking at some of the challenges for housing delivery, UK and Ireland, I'm sure most people on the call are probably aware and familiar with these. The first 4, I'll just focus on the first 4 for the purpose of this presentation. And I think it's quite useful to compare some of the trends happening in Ireland with the UK. I think from my own experience, the UK is probably a couple of years further down the track with MMC adoption. Obviously some big lessons learned of things that have worked and things that haven't worked. If we look at the housing delivery targets, this graph here on the left shows Ireland's housing targets, which was newly updated last year to around 50,000 homes. We're currently at around the 30,000 mark, so we're significantly off that. We have a growing population. We're struggling to meet that target, so we need to do things differently, and that's where the opportunity to use MMC comes in. If we compare this to what we're seeing in the UK, it's something similar, if not slightly worse, where there is a stagnating delivery or output of homes per year, and that new target again has been moved as well. So what this leading to is rising population, demand outpacing supply, and that backlog is increasing. So every year we struggle to meet them targets. That backlog is increasing and exacerbating the shortage of housing. Some of the drivers for that, a significant skill shortage resulting in rapidly increasing costs. So if we look at the target, basically latest target is estimated to be 210,000 employees required in construction in Ireland. It needed to be grown by 80,000 construction workers to support other infrastructure projects as well as housing, so things like retrofitting and other larger infrastructure projects as well. If we compare that to the UK, we can see it's probably slightly worse. That might be exacerbated by an aging labour force, coupled with I suppose the impacts of Brexit and the inability to probably use foreign labour in comparison to some of the EU countries. But again, it signifies the need to do something different, and MMC is one of the possible solutions for that. I suppose the knock-on benefit impacts of that is house growth and affordability is becoming a significant challenge. If we compare the average Irish wage with rent and residential property prices, we can see that rent and property prices are outpacing average Irish wages, which is becoming increasingly an increasing challenge and should be a serious concern for the Irish economy and government and everyone else involved. And again, something similar trends we're seeing in the UK, where UK house prices are growing at twice the rate of earnings. I think if we look at this, the construction sector and try to map out why is this happening, it is a highly fragmented supply chain. It's costly and makes innovation difficult. So the adoption of MMC is challenging in many of the traditional business models regarding construction delivery. What does a typical design and build contract look like? So a client would literally hire a developer, main contractor, and then underneath that you have a whole host of stakeholders, everything from design teams, trade contractors, component contractors, and material suppliers. As you can imagine, comparing this to other industries, the level of fragmentation makes it incredibly difficult and costly to try and deliver more buildings, more homes, and more infrastructure projects. So again, looking at this, it means that we have to do something different and change our approach to how we build. And I think a piece of work we've done recently with the team at CAST is exploring that layering upon layering and identified that about 50% of our traditional design and build contract is made up of non-value added activities. So 50% will be material labours, and roughly 50% is made up of cumulative risk allocation, cumulative overhead, design contingency fees, and cumulative profit. So again, exacerbating that affordability challenge. Quite an interesting quote before we look at, and something where we can take lessons learned from the car automotive industry, is a quote from Henry Ford on the longer an article is in the process of manufacture, and the more it is moved about, the greater its ultimate cost. And that's exactly what we're seeing in the construction industry. When we talk about moving designs, moving labour, moving materials across that supply chain, the layering upon layering is becoming increasingly high, and again, forces the need to do something different or change our approach. So MMC and its benefits, when it's done right, I won't spend too long on this. I think probably most are familiar with the benefits of MMC at the moment and the potential opportunity for it. So I think coming back to the title of this webinar, is MMC the magic bullet? I would say not, but I think coupled with other policy and market changes, MMC can be a significant driver in the solution to scaling up housing delivery. There's lots of options and lots of happening. We've seen some work well in the UK, probably many others that haven't, as Lord Moylan has mentioned. I think what I quickly like to run through is probably 5 different approaches to scale MMC to support housing delivery. I think the first, a hybrid approach to MMC across sectors and categories, and it's something that we're probably seeing in the UK. So as mentioned, volumetric hasn't worked in low rise in the UK, but it is working in other sectors. And the benefit of that is it it allows us to do more with a construction labour pool. It also creates greater familiarity across the construction supply chain around using offsite methods. Something we're seeing more of is particularly modular companies. There is some quite successful modular companies in the northeast of the UK who focus initially on education, so things like classrooms and schools. But what we're seeing is through familiarity with offsite principles, that's beginning to filter out into other industries such as hospitals. And there's definitely an opportunity to follow a similar approach to that in Ireland. I think the second thing is, before we explore how we build things, we need to have a rethink about what we build. There is some, I suppose, pockets of innovation of urban design typologies that greater suit the use of MMC solutions and design principles that align with the likes of DFMA approaches. So one of the challenges, I know from my own experience working with one of the modular companies in the UK, was trying to build offsite and modular, but make it look like traditional construction. So things like pitched roofs, traditional facade layouts like render and bricks. It is quite difficult, and I think that was one of the significant factors when trying to develop more offsite solutions. So I think going forward, there needs to be an increased rethink about how we actually approach design and urban design. I think one interesting concept is the missing middle housing concept, coined by a guy called Dan Parlock, which basically looks to bridge the gap. I know in Ireland there's a lot of talk around kind of low single family detached homes and mid-rise and high-rise apartments, but there's definitely an opportunity to help rejuvenate some of the towns and cities across Ireland with using mixed-use development from things like duplexes and courtyard apartments. I think to just touch on a brief example of this, and I'm currently based in Leeds myself, so I've seen actually this development. It's a climate innovation district in South Bank, Leeds, and essentially this is a more sustainable and innovative way of building that has MMC principles built in from the start. And essentially what it is a higher density build. It uses alternative architectural aesthetics, so things like flat roofs, alternative facade details that don't require the use of scaffolding, and that has proven hugely beneficial. And the other benefit of this approach is that it's highly scalable as well. The other element or consideration to help scale MMC in Ireland is government stimulation through funding mandates. And again, Lord Moylan touched on this. This has had mixed benefits, some positive, some not so positive, and that was through the UK Affordable Homes Programme, which is essentially 12 billion fund to target to 180,000 affordable homes in the UK. To help incentivise MMC, 25% of, and in order to avail of that grant, 25% of a scheme would need to be built using MMC principles. And how that was scored was using the principle of PMV, or pre-manufactured value, to qualify a solution of MMC. There was some, although overall there were some really positive outcomes around encouraging uptake of MMC, greater investment to drive scale and increase housing output. There's definitely some lessons learned for Ireland to support increasing the benefits of that, and that could be mandating categories 1 and 2 more so than some of the kind of lower MMC categories 6 to 7, because there was probably feedback that some developers were gaming the system. There should also be other things to encourage and award better use of standardized design components. So I'm aware that there's a lot of good work happening in Ireland to try and standardize designs to support planning and also build types, greater use of benefits and encouragement to try and increase the use of this. And then some other stuff that we're seeing across, particularly in the US, is supplier maturity assessment. So actually categorizing suppliers and supporting them grow through government schemes and incentives. Just, I suppose, the fourth example, and again, probably close because I'm just beside it, support development partnerships that prioritize MMC delivery. So there's some really interesting developments happening in the UK at the moment. This one in Leeds is Era Park, where basically it's a partnership between an international real estate developer called Fastinet, Leeds City Council, and an off-site manufacturer called Inhouse, to basically develop a 24-acre space on the outskirts of Leeds city centre. And that has MMC principles built in from the start, where they use off-site components and facade systems that are shipped in from Lithuania, and has made it an incredibly efficient way of building, minimising, I suppose, the impact to the outer urban areas around this space as well. So it's a really interesting concept, and prioritising this type of partnership that focuses on MMC delivery is a real opportunity for, again, similar towns and cities of Ireland to try and take learnings from. I think that the fifth and final approach I'd like to talk about is a sensible and cost-driven approach to scaling MMC. So any government-funded programme should include a detailed roadmap for implementing the use of MMC and should have a cost benchmarking and long-term reduction targets included. I think we're all aware of some of the challenges when government has tried to implement off-site systems. There needs to be a realization that there is going to be an experience curve, and initially some of these MMC systems will be more expensive than traditional, but setting expectations and developing a roadmap for how we can actually reduce these costs to make them on par with traditional construction and down the line cheaper. And this is something that we're seeing in the UK and further afield in places like Australia as well. One thing that we're starting to work more with clients is taking frameworks from cost unit economics from other sectors and industries about how do we actually understand the true costs of delivering homes and making them more affordable. So things like evaluating the end-to-end value chain. So not just the off-site component or the on-site component, but the complete value chain, and trying to delayer that value chain where possible. Starting off kind of value stream map and time and motion studies, taking lessons learned from the automotive industry of how do we actually break down the work content and understand where waste and non-value activity is happening. From there, we kind of focus on cost reduction levers. So that could be focus on design, standardizing design, procurement practices, manufacturing, improving how we actually manufacture, and site assembly processes, and having it all housed under a housing delivery platform of standardized designs. And again, won't spend too long in this context of time, but basically starting off design and technical, so standardizing design libraries, giving the illusion of mass customization, so being quite clever about how we look to design, so things don't look the same and we don't lose the aesthetics, but allow for better approaches to manufacturing and site assembly. Things like procurement, bulk purchasing between strategic companies and suppliers. That again is something that's quite common and picking up pace in the likes of Australia through their housing program. Manufacturing to world-class manufacturing systems. Again, I think there's a huge opportunity to take some of the learnings from car automotive. So things like new product introduction, virtual prototyping, and developing a drumbeat to support consistent pipeline for factory output. Logistics, install and assembly, and commissioning as well. And that basically all ties back into how we actually design the buildings and the core focus of that. Again, something that we're starting to see more of is industry benchmarking, and something that Ireland probably needs to take when we're trying to scale MMC deliveries, setting the benchmark of how do we actually cost delivering MMC solutions. This is just an example. So breaking down how do we actually assemble structures, mechanical facades, understanding what the current cost is and what does the best in class look like. So take an example from probably some of the larger house builders, but also from different countries as well, taking lessons learned, setting up initiatives to try and understand where can we make them cost improvements in delivery and building that into a long-term sensible timeline. Again, as mentioned, kind of once we have the benchmarking, what we're seeing is developing and prioritizing initiatives to help reduce that cost, focusing on kind of that target and average benchmarking cost, breaking that down into a sensible timeline. So conscious of time, so I won't spend too much. I think the final point I'd like to mention is where have we seen this starting to work? So Bristol City Council have actually done a really interesting project where they've taken a small sample of house types. They've partnered with 9 MMC suppliers across the Category 1 and Category 2 MMC divisions, and basically they use that to define the benchmarking KPIs for MMC and benchmark these MMC solutions against traditional build types. That's been really beneficial for basically setting expectations. The output of that was also that MMC initially for a small, I think there was about 12 plots that they completed, was about 3,000 per meter squared in comparison to traditional construction, which is around 2,100 per meter squared. But what it did allow them to do was support at scale that if they reached a certain target, they felt that they could achieve an initial cost of 2,000 per meter squared. And it allowed them to basically develop that pipeline of opportunities in a controlled manner, again, supporting that level of scale. So again, appreciative could have flown through that, but to summarize, I think it's a really exciting opportunity to be in the industrialized construction MMC space. Although it's not going to be the magic bullet for solving the housing crisis, I think coupled with other policy and market changes, it can be a major driver to improving how we actually deliver homes and increasing the scale of home delivery as well. So thanks for listening. Happy to take any questions at the end, or if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop me an email or message on LinkedIn. So thanks for listening.